welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Alex, and I believe the phrase is, it's better late than never, but I have no idea if that applies to this video. That's right, I'm going to be doing the mid-year freakout tag, the thing that is supposed to be done in June, in August. You know, sometimes life gets really busy and you end up missing important milestones like the middle of the year. The bulk of this video is going to be my reading stats because I personally love tracking those throughout the year. I get a big kick out of it, so I'm going to include those right here. I've read a whopping, get ready for this, 18 books this year. And on top of that, I'm also behind on my reading goal. It's been a little rough this year. All joking aside, there's nothing wrong with other people reading a significantly larger number than me. There's nothing wrong with me reading the small number that I have. I really can't compare myself and shouldn't compare myself to anybody else, so I'm just going to be content, as best I can, with the 18 that I have managed to finish this year. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you what those books were. And these will be in order. So up first I have Burial Rites by Hannah Kent, Afterworlds by Scott Westerfeld, Poison by Sarah Pinborough, Gilchrist by Christian Gallagher, The Bees by Laylene Paul, Waystation by Clifford D. Simic, The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak, A History of Wild Places by Shay Earnshaw, The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez, Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel, The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez, Pyramids by Terry Pratchett, I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, Free Water by Amina Lukman Dawson. So I totally missed putting Finding Me in here by Viola Davis, which is terrible because that was one of my favorite books this year, so here it is in post. The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay, and Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. So far this year I've read 6,656 pages, and you can tell by this pie chart that I predominantly lean towards emotional stories. I had 8 emotional books that I read, followed closely by reflective, dark, and adventurous. What can I say? I like books that make me feel things. Like sadness. For pace, I read predominantly medium-paced books, which I guess means that I favor books that are kind of steady. With slow being the next highest, I would never have really thought of myself as a person that likes slow builds to books, but if done properly, they definitely can be enjoyable. And apparently I kind of stay away from fast-paced books. And that one book, I would argue, is Poison by Sarah Pinborough. And the only real reason is because it's a novella and it's shorter than the other novels, so it just has to move quicker. So yeah, Steady Eddie wins the race. And then for page numbers, I predominantly read 300 to 499 page books, with also having equal number of 500 plus page books and less than 300 page books. So again, I guess I kind of like the middle ground. I don't pick books intentionally like that. Like, I don't look at a book and I'm like, ah yes, that falls between the 300 to 499 page category. I guess it stands to reason if that's the average number of pages that a book has, that most would fall into that category. For fiction and nonfiction, I just got into nonfiction last month. I read 2 nonfiction books in 1 month after never reading any. So yes, all of the other books that I've read this year, the other 16 have been fiction. So for genre breakdown, the top genre for me so far this year, which actually kind of surprises me, has been fantasy with 4 books. I read very widely, as you're going to be able to see from this graphic. There's 8 different genres, I would say, that the books I've read have fallen into. So I haven't really leaned heavily towards any of them. Historical fiction is the next highest, tied with science fiction. Science fiction is technically my favorite genre, but again, I try to read a lot of different things, so I don't necessarily always focus on what I would generally gravitate towards. And then tied at 2 books apiece, I have literary fiction, nonfiction, and thrillers. And then the genres I've read the least of, at only 1 book apiece, is contemporary and horror. Now the horror is particularly surprising because 2 years ago, I had a total kick in horror where it was the first time I'd ever been reading horror. I absolutely loved it. I devoured horror over any other genre that year, but I haven't really read any. And I haven't read a single Stephen King, which is also surprising because usually when I read horror, the bulk of it has been Stephen King. The contemporary one really doesn't surprise me at all because, to be honest with you, I really don't like contemporary very much, and if I do read it, it needs to be done really well. I just don't typically read a lot of stories that are set in modern times and don't have any sort of fantastical elements to them. Stories that are just about people's lives. And even then, Afterworlds doesn't even truly fall into contemporary. Half of the book is contemporary and half of it's paranormal fiction, but because the contemporary side is what wrote the paranormal fiction side, it's fiction within fiction, I feel like the true story is contemporary. That sounded complicated, but that's my genre breakdown, and honestly I feel like I need to add in more science fiction and horror in there since I love both of those so much and kind of bump maybe those numbers up a little bit. For the most read authors this year, I've read 2 books by Simon Jimenez and 2 books by Emily St. John Mandel. I definitely think the most informative graph is number of books and pages because it's probably insightful for you, but it's particularly insightful for me. I, of course, knew during the spring and the early summer that I wasn't reading very much. I was lucky to finish a book a month. If I got to 2, like, that's fantastic. So in February, I read 4 books, and in July, I read 4 books, so those both were the highest months. And I honestly think if I work really hard for the rest of the year, I might be able to meet my reading goal of reading 42 books this year. I would have to bust my butt though. I think I could do it in a fun way. I don't look at it as a struggle or a chore, but I also don't want to beat myself up if I don't get that goal because I always have next year. And next year, I definitely know that I'll go harder than I did this year. Assuming again that life doesn't try to beat me in the ass. Now for my star ratings, of the 18 reviews that I've done, I have an average rating of 4.08 stars, which honestly is really good because to me a 4-star rating is me telling you, I think that you should read this book 1 time. And I know that 4 stars being the highest category, it might seem like I'm particularly generous with my reading, but the truth is, over the last few years, I've really narrowed down the type of books that I really love to read. Now, of course, I had a 2.5 in there, and I've had a 3-star in there, so it's not like everything that I read is amazing. You're gonna have those duds sometimes, but I, for the most part, feel like I know myself pretty well on what I'm gonna like and can see it and I can pick it out. So in total, I've had 1 2.5-star review, 1 3-star review, 2 3.5-star reviews, 7 4-star reviews, 4 4.5-star reviews, and 3 5-star reviews. And for the sake of time, it probably would be better for me to just tell you what my higher rated review books were, so like my 4.5 and 5-star reviews, because then at least you know which of all of the books I named are ones that I'm like, these are great. You should absolutely read these, instead of just ones where I'm like, yeah, it's good. So I'll start with the 4.5-star books. The first one is The Bees by Layleen Paul. You'll particularly like this if you're somebody that's into beekeeping or learning about bees the way that I am. It's not spot on in terms of scientific accuracy by any means, but there is a lot of really good information in here, and it's fun to follow an anthropomorphic bee. And then I have Finding Me by Viola Davis. I said in my reading wrap-up for last month that that book felt like if you were to sit down to dinner with her and ask her about her life and she just tells it to you. I just think that she's such an incredible person, and if you're looking for a really good autobiography to read that also hits really hard, she had a very traumatic childhood, you should read her book. And then I have Free Water, and I read this at the same time as Finding Me, and I could tell you that both of them hit hard, but in different ways. This is, of course, a middle grade novel. It's not as gut-wrenchingly brutal as you're going to get with an autobiography or an adult novel, but it also didn't hold any punches in terms of what slaves actually went through, and I think that for a child reading this novel, it would have been very impactful, so I definitely would recommend either you or perhaps your kid end up picking this up. Then there's The Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. That book was one where I genuinely didn't want it to end. It was pretty short, and I was just rapidly seeing the end arrive and wishing that I had like another 100 pages of content. I would definitely recommend picking it up, especially if you've read her other novels like The Glass Hotel, because there are some characters that cross over between the two. And then for 5-star reads, starting it off, I have The Book Thief, which really shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. I was way behind on the ball of reading this book, and I honestly can't believe that it took me so long. I really missed out on all of that time that I could have spent just gushing about this book, but I get to now. So there you go. Read this book if you haven't already. You don't even really have to be that big of a fan of historical fiction to like this. I think it's just that well written. Then up next I have The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. I don't know how many times I've referenced this on my channel. I can tell you it's going to be a lot more because I love this book. Genuinely, I thought it was incredible. It's also one of those books that will absolutely gut punch you. I went into it thinking it was some sort of like cozy found family novel. It's not. It's not even remotely close to that. If you're somebody with a heart who doesn't like other people to suffer, this book will hurt you. you should read it anyway. It has a really well-built universe for a science fiction novel, and yes, it is set pretty far in the future and they do have advanced technology, but nothing is ever overly explained to the point where a lay person who doesn't really read sci-fi couldn't pick this up. There's also an evil corporation in it, which is one of my favorite tropes. And then lastly, I have Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I just got done reading this. I was so thoroughly impressed by how intelligent and emotional and thoughtful this book was. Gabrielle Zevin thought of so many things. She had great representation in here of both people of color and people with disabilities. She also knows how to do both platonic and sexual relationships very well, because not every relationship needs to lead to sex. Some of them can be intimate in friendship as well, and this book has that in spades. And with that, I'm going to call my freakout tag here, but thank you so much for spending this time with me. If you like my video, I would really appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up and subscribe. It means a lot. Leave me a comment down below. I would love to hear from you, and I hope to see you in the next video. So as always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, that you all stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.